Assalamu alaikum students, welcome to your course TEFL, Teaching of English as a Foreign Language. Let's start today's lecture. Great. So we are talking about what, students? Yes, we were talking about exploring language. Remember that? Yes. So before that, what did we do? Yes, we talked about exploring skills, and before exploring skills we talked about different methods. And you know how many methods we talked about? Yes, we talked about 8 methods, and then we moved on to exploring skills, and then we moved on to exploring language, right? So this is what we have done, an overview. In the next lecture I'll try to give you a review of all the lectures, whatever we have covered in this course. Let's start today. We have to start another important feature of language, that is, you all know it, grammar. Yes, students, grammar. First of all, I want to tell you that majority misspells this word grammar. So the correct spellings are G-R-A-M-M-A-R, right? Grammar. So this is under section exploring language, and which others we have, other parts we have discussed so far. Yes, we talked about the sound system, mean, pronunciation, and yesterday we finished talking, yes, our discussion on vocabulary. And today we are going to start the grammar, very important feature of language, right? And then we'll move on to the review part of our course. So let's start today our See, so what did we do in the last lecture? We talked about vocabulary, in fact. So while teaching vocabulary, what is the role of a teacher, right? And that's why we are talking about these features of language, so that you being teacher will be able to help students, right, in improving their pronunciation, and of course you can help students in improving their vocabulary. And today we will try to see that how we can teach grammar in, of course, in our class. So in this course particularly, then when you are a language teacher, you are teaching language, right, and you are teaching it as a foreign language. So how will we handle a very important part of language, that is grammar? And I told you how to spell this word grammar, right? So as usual, we have to review the last lecture. In the last lecture we talked about vocabulary, and in the vocabulary the role of a teacher is very important. What is the role? Yes, to focus on the most useful vocabulary. This is very important. And we saw that, for example, 1,000 words, right? And then of course second 1,000 words, right? And we also try to see that how we can help students, right, to teach vocabulary in an appropriate way. So the role of teacher, the first role is to focus on the most useful vocabulary, to provide what? Strategy training for the low frequency vocabulary. This is important. And you know what is in fact low frequency words are what are high frequency words, in very simple words which are commonly used with the frequency of the words in fact is high. So we call them what? High frequency words. And the other one is those words which are not commonly used, so their frequency is low, so we call them low frequency words, right? So that is the first role of a teacher while teaching vocabulary of a foreign language. Second, in fact, to ensure that vocabulary training, in fact, this vocabulary learning has a chance to occur in all parts of the course, right? This is important. Again, I'll refer to four strands, right? And then while talking about those 4 strands, right, and in simple words, those 4 strands, they talk about what? Yes, meaningful, right? Meaningful, in fact, learning meaningful input, right? That is reading and what? Listening. And then also mean output, fine, that is speaking and writing. And again what? fluency, how to develop fluency, and of course these were what the 4 parts of the strand we talk about, and for every language course these 4 strands are important. So whenever we in fact start a language course, what we do, we focus on the 4 important points. We focus on language part. So while focusing on language, what do? We talk about sound, we talk about grammar, we talk about vocabulary, and we talk about discourse. While teaching about the input skills, we focus on reading and listening, and of course we'll talk about output. So we help our students in their speaking and writing, and also we try to help students to develop their fluency, right? So that is what we see in the last lecture also. And then how to improve vocabulary, and there are different words. Some words are simple, for example that one word, for example, and then you have multi-unit words are there, you have collocations are there, and then we refer to the Palmer. What Palmer says that you need to memorize these words, of course. So what memorize, right? You have to learn those words if you want to be proficient in this language, right? So this is what the Palmer says, that we can memorize words, of course, and the more you memorize this word, the more the words you know, then you will be more proficient, right? Because you know these the multi-unit words, and of course you know the core meaning words, for example, or you know the word families. So definitely it would help you. And then again, the teaching vocabulary and of course the learning vocabulary, yes, it comes under a broad framework of language course. So then in fact we talk about these 4 strands, right? What? Learning from, meaning based, in fact meaning focused input. The first strand is very simple. It says that learning from what? Meaning focused, right? Meaning focused input, listening and what? That is listening and reading. And second point was deliberate language focused learning, that is sound system, grammar, vocabulary and discourse. And then learning from meaning focused output, that is learning by having to produce language in speaking and writing. And finally you have what? Developing fluency. How can we do that? Yes, becoming quick and confident at listening, speaking, reading and writing. So these were the 4 strands that you see are important, of course, for any language course. So dear students, this was just a short review that we talked about in the last week. Today I gave you a short review because we have to talk more, because the area is very important, that is the grammar, in fact. So this area needs more time. Let's talk of grammar. What is grammar, by the way? What is grammar to you? Grammar mean, when you talk about the grammar are what? Rules. All right, okay, you're right that grammars are rules. Then who gave these rules? Right? Yes, you can say native speakers, in fact, right? They gave these rules. So can we say the grammar is what? Set of rules that we follow. Then again, this word, if you see the word etymology of this word grammar, so from the word grammika, right, and which meant to write. So when you see this word, that is from the origin is from Latin, and from the verb was grammika, and grammika meant to write. So which means the grammar in fact helps us in writing. So in other words, we can say that grammar is what? Rules of a language. And who gave these rules? Yes, these rules are given by native speakers to write in that language. Fine. So that is, simple discussion on what the grammar is there. So let's start, in fact, what is grammar. Fine, we'll ask. So mind you, we are following, yes, Practical English Language Teaching. So by David Noonan, right? So David Noonan, what he did? He compiled, in fact, of course, research work of different experts, right? And we saw that in the first, we're talking while exploring skills, we in fact discussed reading skill, listening skill and all these skills. and of course from the research work of different people, right? And here this topic, particularly the grammar, right, it is David Noonan's own topic on that, his views and what we add value to it. Is that clear, students? So what is grammar? Yes, is a set of rules. Grammar is what? Set of rules specifying the correct what? Fine. Specifying what? Specifying the find the correct order of words at sentence level. Well, students, so the grammar is what? Grammar is in fact is a set of rules fine specifying the correct order of words, fine, particularly at sentence level. So this is what you see. I mean, some general understanding about the grammar, that it is what? A set of rules, and these rules specify the correct order, right? Which order? The correct order. And at what? Which level? The sentence level, right? So this is what a general understanding about the grammar, and I already told you that grammar is what? The rules, and rules given by the native speakers to write that language, right? And of course, you know that there is a one spoken version and there is a written version. So when it comes to written version of language, so definitely the use of grammar is more as compared to the oral version. We cannot say that the oral version altogether negates the grammar. Somehow, right, in the oral version we incorporate some rules, but generally you see when it comes to writing, so we have to, yes, follow the rules. We have to incorporate the grammatical rules. So let's ask Longman, the dictionary, in fact, what Longman dictionary applied. This is a very important dictionary, Longman Dictionary of Applied Linguistics. So what the dictionary says: a description of the structure of language and the way in which units such as words and phrases are combined to produce sentences in the language. This is very simple, right? But Longman says that is what? It is a description of what? Structures, right, of a language. So a description of structure of language and the way in which these units are combined, mean the words or phrases are combined to produce sentence in the language. Very simple, right? In other words, if you see this Longman's definition, what he tries to say, that it is combination of units, right? What? Combination of words, combination of what? You see, combination of phrases, or the clauses, in fact. Fine. And why do we combine these things? Why we combine these units? To produce a sentence, and again, if you say a meaningful sentence. Because if you see this definition of sentences, that a sentence is a group of words which make sense, right? So that's why here, what happens, what makes in fact the grammar, that once you have structure, of course, a description of the structure of language and the way in which units such as words and phrases are combined to produce sentences. This is one is Longman's Dictionary of Applied Linguistics. What this is what dictionary says. So now, sentences are acceptable if they follow the rules, right, set out by the grammar of the language. If a sentence follows a rule, right, and if the rule, which rule? Of course, the rule of the grammar of that language. So we will say that that sentence is acceptable sentence. For example, if you see that in English we have a pattern SVO, subject followed by verb followed by object. So if a sentence is there, that a sentence follows this pattern, so we will call this sentence an acceptable sentence, a correct sentence, right? For example, if I say that I teach you people, right, or I teach my students. See, I is a subject, teach is a verb, and my students, of course, in this way, object. So it's a acceptable sentence. Why? Because it follows a rule, right? The rule was SWO, right? S stands for subject, V stands for verb, O stands for object. However, if I change the same sentence, for example, if I say my students I teach, right? So now again the words are same, but I have changed the pattern. In the first sentence I said I teach my students. Now in the second pattern I say my students teach I. So this sentence is not acceptable because this sentence does not follow that pattern SVO. Is that clear, students? I hope you understand. So which sentences are acceptable? Those sentences are acceptable which follow a specific pattern of grammar. Is that clear, students? Alright. So again, when talking about the grammar, you see the grammarian distinguish between prescriptive grammar and descriptive grammar. Now, what is prescriptive grammar, my dear students? You know what? Prescription. You know what do doctors do? They prescribe you medicine. So is the case here. The prescriptive grammar is the one which is prescribed by, of course, grammarian. These are the rules, right? They prescribe and, you know, they make some rules and ask you to follow. So this grammar is called prescriptive grammar. Like you see, you find your grammar books. You must have seen lots of books around you, right? What are these? So students, these are what? The rules prescribed by various grammarians, right? So what do we call it? And they ask you to follow it, in fact, right? So they have given some rules, right? They have prescribed some rules, fine. Well, so these rules have been prescribed and we, of course, we are supposed to follow these rules. That is prescriptive grammar. Second grammar is, my dear students, descriptive grammar. Even the word shows, of course, mean that which is described. And how? The question is, how can we describe grammar? So what we do that, we see the use of the language. What we do, we see that how people use the language and then we describe some rules. So this is called what? Descriptive grammar, right? So prescriptive grammar, which is prescribed by the grammarians, fine, they have given rules and they expect the language learners to follow these rules. Whereas descriptive grammar, of course, descriptive grammarians, what they do, they see the use of the language, how people use, and then in fact they make some rules. So which one would you prefer, prescriptive or descriptive? Yes, of course most of you would go for which one? Descriptive grammar. Is that clear, students? So prescriptive and descriptive, I hope you understand. Alright, so for example, there are some sentences on your slide. You can see that these sentences, in fact, would be judged ungrammatical by prescriptive grammarians. However, they were all produced by native speakers and would therefore find the way into descriptive grammar. For example, everybody is ready now, aren't they? Right? So a prescriptive grammarian would say that how come the question tag aren't they? Because we're talking about everybody, right? I mean, of course, our subject is singular. So as per the rule, if the subject is singular, so the tag would be, yes, isn't he? I hope you understand. But of course, if you see these sentences, they are, of course, they are being used by even native speakers. They are accepted, in fact. Or neither Fahim nor Hasib had to work late. Did they? Again now, because we are talking about only one person. So if you follow the prescriptive rules, so the question tag should be, did he? Is that clear? Because we are referring to only one person, whereas these sentences are what? Accepted. Fine. Native speakers, in fact, of course, they have accepted these rules, these sentences as grammatically correct. So these sentences fall under which category? Descriptive grammar. Students, you understand? Clear? So the idea should be clear in your mind that what is a descriptive, right, grammar and what is prescriptive grammar, and we have to see the use of a sentence, right? If you see, and descriptive grammarian feel that the users are important, right? Because we do not speak language. In fact, yes, what happens, right? We speak language. Language does not speak us. So that's why the user of a language are important. I hope you understand. So this is what the two approaches are there. The prescriptive, rules are designed, rules are given, and you are expected to follow. Again, there is dictation is given, right? And whereas, of course, the user, so in prescriptive grammar, the user is of course, his authority has been what? You see, he doesn't have authority because he has to follow the rules. In fact, it means that, well, the language dictates him. Whereas in other case, when we see the use of a language and then we make some rules, so that we call it descriptive grammar. And I gave you an example of some sentences. So where these are, as per the prescriptive grammar, not acceptable, but descriptive grammar says they are in use. Because the users, when the native speakers have accepted them, so of course we have to accept it in the grammar. So that's why we have this category, we call it descriptive grammar. So here is what another image that you can see, that we are talking about teaching grammar in context. Have a look. It might help you that what is grammar and how we can teach in a context. Teaching grammar as a product, teaching grammar as a process, and teaching grammar as a skill, right? And there are some points also that what is teaching grammar as a product, right? That it is, of course, the output, it is not the and then teaching grammar as a process, and finally as a skill. I hope you understand. So if you teach it as a product, so helps learner to notice and to structure by focusing on specified forms and meanings. As a process, give learner practice in the skills of language use, yes, as a process, right? So grammar, of course, means the process of grammar should be, should be worked on, right? And as a skill, yes, learners to utilize grammar for their own. So of course, you have to decide on that which approach should we follow. So students, moving on. So first to talk about, yes, simply we saw what is grammar so far, right? And under this we saw that, what is the definition of the grammar, right? And what is in fact prescriptive grammar and what is descriptive grammar. So the background to the teaching of grammar, because we are here in 5 we are talking about these systems of language, so that we will able to, right, help our students to teach and to improve their sounds, of course, the pronunciation, to improve their vocabulary, and also to improve their grammar and discourse, right? So that's why we are talking about these things. So the next background to this grammar is that what is the background to the teaching of grammar? So dear students, the grammar, of course, the place of grammar in the language has had checkered history, in fact. That we see that what happened initially, of course, and then where are we now? So 30 years ago, if you go back, right, what happens if you go to David Noonan? So the language and grammar, yes, they were the same things, right? Before 30 years, people were of the view that the grammar is an inevitable part of the language, right? That without grammar, language is nothing, right? So language was given very important part in language. So, and even people thought that the language and grammar, in fact, they are the two sides of the same coin. They are the same things, in fact. And even some people were of the view that you see, the grammar is what the hub of the language. Because grammar is what grammar gives rules. And the rules, in fact, make language. This was, in fact, a viewpoint, if you go back to 30 years, right? 30 years ago, this was the viewpoint that grammar is the crux. The grammar is the central hub of the language, right? Then what happened? And then, of course, the primary aim of teaching was to ensure that the learner mastered the grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary of the language, right? So, realizing that the grammar is an important part, and then what was the goal? Yes, to help students to master what? Pronunciation, to master grammar, to master vocabulary of the language, right? And then what happened, of course, for this one, the dominant methodology was audiolingualism. And I hope you all know ALM, audiolingual method, derived from, yes, structuralist and behavioral psychology, right? The theories behind ALM, of course, you know that one theory was structuralist, right? Structuralism, and second what? Behaviorism, right? And these two theories, of course, the structuralists, they say that structure of a sentence is important, and behaviorism, of course, you know that they are talking about that learning is by doing, learning is by what? By drilling, by practicing and all that, right? So ALM, in fact, and ALM methods, you know it, see, talks about that language learning is a habit formation. And how can you form this habit? Once you practice the language, and you practice as much as you can. The more you practice, the more you learn. And you saw in ALM, right, that you see that lots of drills are given in the class, and there are some chain drills, there are repetitions, in fact. So again, some patterns were given, of course, and in this pattern what happened, you see, of course, I mean the philosophy behind was that you can say what, these practices, these drills, repetitions, of course, help the learner to learn language. And in fact, this gives, you could say, a native-like proficiency also. You know that, of course, the method was the given also. I hope you understand ALM, audiolingual method, and it was what? In the wake of, First World War, where America needed people, in fact, to have people native-like proficiency. So again, this was a long debate. So that was the method ALM, foreign language teaching, right? And you see, the grammar teaching was, of course, we were talking about that. The primary aim was to master all these areas of language. So then, again, what happened, that is ALM says that present new language to be learned, giving a clear demonstration of its meaning through non-verbal means such as pictures or stories. Okay. And then ALM says do not give grammatical explanation. So this is what simple we talked about earlier as well. Model what? The target pattern using number of examples. And the heart of this ALM was substitution drills. And you saw that, of course, what happened, that initially teacher gives a pattern, right? Teacher gives a sentence, and then sentence remains same. And what the teacher does, he keeps on changing. For example, sometimes he changes the noun, he changes the object, right? And sometimes he changes what? The subject. So substitution drills, that was, you could say, the heart of ALM was there, that the stock of the trade was that, what? Substitution drills. I hope you understand. Clear? All right. So then in 1970, what happened? The two development had major effect on language teaching. You know that 1970, two major developments. Firstly, the researcher began to look at what the order in which learners acquired the grammar of the language. What was the order? Right? Researcher, they in fact started working on, and they tried to find out, right, that what is in fact the order in which learners acquired the grammar of the language. Before this, it was assumed that the learner first language had strong effect on the order in which grammatical items were acquired. You see that, of course, when you learn a second language, foreign language, so your first language had a strong effect on it. This was an assumption then, you see. And after research, it was suggested that acquisition order are determined by the nature of language to be learned, right? And rather than through contexts, what? Contrast between the first language and the target language. So this is what you see later. Initially it was a view that, well, the language one, the rules of language one play an important role in knowing, in learning, right, the grammatical patterns of the second language, right? Initially it was the viewpoint. In 1970 these two developments were made, right? Then what happened, you see, after research it was disclosed, it was suggested that, you see, the acquisition order, of course, right, are determined by the nature of that language. What is the nature of that language? Not by You see that by contrasting L1 with L2. So second development, my dear students, again the first development was this. Second proved that language was a vehicle of communication. You know, when I say this word vehicle of communication, mean language is for communication, right? So these were the, in fact, major developments that took place in 1970. And then of course first development was that it is not that that L1 in fact affects your patterns of L2, rather it is what? It is the nature of the language that in fact you see does a major role. Second development was the language is for communication. So talking about 1970. Have a look, my dear student, what is it? Grammar and punctuation. See, the MS at the grammar is being taught and also punctuation. See, so we were talking about the background, right? So again in 1970, those were two developments. So these developments, in fact, this development led directly to the development of CLT, the second development. That was that language is for communication. So that development led to the development of this methodology, that is CLT, Communicative Language Teaching. Then two recent trends, right? I mean, there were two recent trends also in language learning were, first, focus on form, and second, consciousness learning. I mean, again, the form, what the form is the structure of a sentence. That focus on the form, right? And then consciousness learning, right? Or consciousness raising. We will see in the classroom activities, right? In the classroom tasks, once we will start that, what is consciousness or raising. So focus on form refers to that practice of explicitly drawing students' attention to linguistic features within the context, meaning focused activities, right? The form mean the structure, the pattern, right? So the form on what? Focus on form of a sentence, right? Not the function, but on form. And what is form? I told you that it is what refers to practice of explicitly drawing students' attention to the linguistic features of the language within a context. Now, dear students, and then communication comes first and focus on form comes second. This is the first one is that form, in fact, focus on form. Second, consciousness raising, right? And third thing is that, of course, communication first and focus on form comes second. Mean function, right? Giving priority to function over form. These were some of the trends were also there in that age. Now, what is this consciousness raising? In fact, is a type of focus on form approach to grammar teaching. Form again mean syntax. Talking about the right, consciousness raising is a type of focus that is, right, is a form of approach to grammar teaching. That is, we call it consciousness raising. Is that clear? Now, what does this is according to Larson, right? What does he say? That students are not required to produce the target structures. Instead, they need to be aware of the target grammatical items through discovery-oriented tasks. So Larson says, well, again, that implicitly, what the Larson, is against this view that the students need to be given structures of the target language, like the patterns, right? What Larson, in fact, was of the view that yes, the students, are required to find out the rules. They should be given some situations, and from those situations, students would discover rules. This was what the Larson's viewpoint. I hope you understand. You see, so Larson said that, well, he was against giving target structures to students, right? Don't give them the patterns, rather give them situation where they would discover the rules on their own. Because once they would discover rules on their own, so they would be in a better position to know those rules, and they would be in a better position to apply those rules in the language, because definitely language is for communication. And if the student know the rules but they are unable to use those rules, so that is what? Useless, right? So this was the viewpoint given by what? Larson, that yes, you see, the structures are to be discovered rather to be given to the students. Fine. So these are what Larson says. Nowadays students, in fact, come to the principles. This was just the background, right? So in background, we talked about in 1970, there were some developments, right? You see the developments, and then what happened? You see, of course, there was consciousness raising on form, and then focus on form, and then focus on form. Or what does it mean? We moved on. All right. What are the principles for teaching grammar? The next aspect of the lecture is that what are the principles for teaching grammar? The third, part of this the area, that is grammar. So what do you think by how do you teach? If I give you a chance, how would you teach grammar? Or how did your teachers teach you grammar? You have done the bachelor's, you have spent almost 14 years in this field, and now you are pursuing your master's. By the way, what was the methodology of your teachers? Have you ever tried to know, or have you ever tried to see that which methodology your teachers are using, or the teacher used once you were the student? Have you ever tried? No, you never tried. All right. So dear students, this is that we will see what are the principles for teaching the grammar. The first principle is, my dear students, that integrate both inductive and deductive methods for grammar teaching. Again, yes, I'm sure you know these approaches because we had discussion on these methods while talking about foreign language teaching methods, right? So it means that integrate. What does integrate mean, right? It means that you can use both, or it depends on your students. Fine. So integration means that, well, it is not hard and fast that you only use deductive approach for grammar teaching, or you use only inductive approach for grammar teaching. Fine. It depends on the situation, and you can integrate both of them. Or at times you feel that yes, one approach works better for the students, so you can use it. So I'm sure you know what is deductive approach, right? In the first method, when we started this course, we talked about grammar translation method. Remember that over there the rules are given by the teacher. So in deductive approach, what happens? First you give some rules, you prescribe some rules, and then you give exercises to the students, and the student try to follow those rules, try to incorporate those rules to clarify exactly the rule that has discussed or that has been given by the teacher, right? So that is deductive approach. Inductive approach is on the reverse of that. That first you give sample sentences, right, and then at the end you see that the rules is inferred from those sample sentences, right? So this is what the two approaches are there, deductive and inductive. So inductive classrooms, the teacher gives us grammatical explanations or rules followed by a set of exercises designed to clarify the grammatical point, right? This was the deductive approach. Second one is inductive, reverses the process. What happens here, students? Yes, we present the learner with samples of the language, and through a process of guided discovery get students to work out the principle of rules for them. In simple words, I told you, you can have this definition if you want to, right? So in deductive approach, what happens? You give rules first, like generally, of course, the traditional methodology of teaching grammar, you must have observed in schools, colleges, where the teachers, right, they give rules, even they dictate you rules, right, and then they expect you to follow those rules, and they also give you some exercises. Well, students, so which approach is better? Deductive approach or inductive approach, or both approaches? Yes, your answer can be it depends. It depends on the situation, right? Even David Noonan says that, well, you see, at times he has to use both the approaches. He has to integrate both what? Inductive and deductive approaches. So it depends on what? It depends on the grammatical point, or also it depends on your students, on understanding of your learner. If your learner are in fact comfortable with the deductive approach, so yes, or if they are comfortable with the other approach, fine, or if they are comfortable with integration of both these approaches. So that was the first principle, my dear student, that of course focus on the principle was, yes, integrate both inductive and deductive methods for grammar teaching. Is that clear? The second principle for grammar teaching is, what is that? Use tasks that make clear the relationship between grammatical form and communicative function. This is important. Now, what do you mean by this? That we need to use the task, we need to use activities that help, in fact, you see, your students to develop relation between the grammar and communication, of course, right? For example, one example is the passive voice, right? So, of course, when you teach the passive voice, and if you just tell them the rules, how to convert an active voice sentence into passive voice, is okay, you have given the rule. But if you do not tell the students that where to use passive voice, how can we use passive voice in our communication? So then the student would not be able to relate that grammatical, of course, point with the communication. So when you teach grammar, right, being the deaf student, what you need to do, yes, try to use the activities and the task that in fact clear the relationship, right, or make the relationship between what? Between the grammatical point and communication. And mind you, of course, when many grammar-based courses are relatively ineffective because they teach grammar as an abstract system. I mean, if you just teach the grammar and you don't link it, if you do not incorporate it in communication, so it means that you know that language is for communication. So if you discuss a form with your students, and if you are unable to incorporate that form in the daily use, so that would be difficult for the students to learn, and again it would be a useless effort, because definitely you know what happens, that after some time the students forget those rules because you have given them, and because you could not incorporate those rules with communication. So dear students, when you teach the grammar, that this rule is important, that try to make relationship, a clear relation between the grammatical point and the communicative function. And if you see that present language as isolated sentences and fail to give learners a proper context for grammar point. So again, people say grammar is a very dry subject. So why it is dry? Because we do not link it with the communication. So if while teaching grammar we try to see that how this grammar point can be used in our communication, how this grammar point can help us in our in improving our communicative ability, so yes, the student would enjoy it. In fact, they will definitely take keen interest in knowing that rule. But if you just teach them that rule for the rule, of course, the grammar for the grammar, so if you being teacher, you are unable to incorporate it with the communication, so that would not be useful for your learners. So that's why when you keep these things in mind, when you teach the grammar, your activities, the task, try to relate them with the communication, right? So I mean, again, the point is that should we, people say that we don't use some I mean grammar, the teachers, they do not link the grammar with communication. So I mean, again, we cannot do away with the grammar. Grammar is an important element of the language. What we can do, yes, that we can link it. For example, the passive voice, of course, I mean, in every grammar, the teacher discusses, I mean, teaches the passive voice and active voice. But the point is, if you link it, that way to use passive voice, for example, when the doer of an activity does not want to disclose, he wants to hides himself, so we can use passive voice. Something has been done, the door has been closed, right? So that's why when you link a grammatical point, right, when you make a relation clear between the communication and the grammatical point, so this would help your learners to take interest in grammar, and ultimately they would improve their language. So your foreign language teaching would definitely be better if you teach grammar in this perspective. I hope you understand. So whenever you teach, for example, you are teaching narrations. So how, I mean, if your old traditional approach is that people gave what the rules on the board, and the students, I mean, take those rules down and they try to follow it. This is one way. But second way is, of course, when you say that, when you have a discussion with the students, that, well, this is that when somebody conveys a message to you, and how would you say that, right? He asked me to do it, for example, right? So then you can have a discussion on that and bring those narrations in use, and then you can, right, you can do that, right? So similarly, example, talking about generally tenses, so talking about the present simple tense. So if you talk about the use of the tense, right, you talk about the daily routines, then you talk about universal truths, and then you come to that point, grammatical point. So that would be definitely useful, because student would be using the tense in that sense. And generally, of course, if you see that people don't know what is the use of present simple tense, right? So ultimately they mixed the tenses wherever they have to use present simple tense, the easiest of all. So the students cannot. Why? Because the teacher again could not in fact link that the use of the tense while teaching that the tense, of course. So that's why, you see, when your activities, your task should be linked with the communication function, so that you see, you help improve language of your learners, in fact. So this is another principle for teaching grammar. You understand? The first principle was, yes, integrate inductive and deductive approaches. Second one is, that is, use tasks that make clear the relationship between grammatical form and communication function. Is that clear, students? All right. The third principle is that focus on what? The development of procedural rather than declarative knowledge. This is important. Now, what is a procedural knowledge and what is the declarative knowledge, my dear students? Well, declarative knowledge was knowing about the language, right? And procedural is, of course, mean that knowing how to use the language. Clear? So that's why when you teach grammar, so focus on development of procedural rather than declarative knowledge, right? So mean that student would be able to use that, right? Example, here is you can see that the declarative knowledge is the knowing language rules, right? And second is procedural knowledge is what is being able to use the language for communication. So while the teaching grammar, my dear students, you need to focus on the development of procedural rather than declarative knowledge. It might have been in your experience that some students, they know the rules, but when they try to use it, they have problems in their speech, right? They know the rules. Even sometimes they in fact in writing, if you give them something, they can easily find out. But when it comes to the practice, when it comes to performance, they cannot, right? So again, when we talk about the native speakers, so native speakers definitely, they may not know, their declarative knowledge might be weak, but their procedure knowledge is fine. They know how to use the language, right? So and maybe for the second language learners, because they are more rule conscious when you learn a language as a second language. So the situation is that what people do, you see, they have the rules, but they cannot apply those rules. So that's why and people say that, well, you see, your declarative knowledge improves your procedural knowledge. Yes, if you are good at declarative, I mean, if you know the rules of the language, then it really helps you to improve your procedural knowledge of the language. When you can be more, you can improve your communication. But again, it is not hard and fast. It is not a sufficient condition for it, right? There are many, in fact, learners who know the rules but fail to use them while writing or speaking. Fine. And there are some learners who have declarative knowledge but lack procedural knowledge. Vast majority of native speakers fall in this category. If you see native speakers, their problem is that they have what? Procedural knowledge, but they may not have declarative knowledge. But they in fact they communicate, and definitely these people are better than the one who has what? Declarative knowledge of the language, who knows the rules, right? But he lacks in procedural knowledge. However, if somebody has both declarative and procedural knowledge, so yes, fine, that is the ideal, that somebody knows both. But if somebody lacks in declarative knowledge but he has procedural one, so it's fine, like native speakers. So you need to know what is procedural knowledge of the language and what is declarative knowledge of the language. So procedural mean the use of the language, and declarative mean the knowing. Like you see that what is declarative is the knowledge, is the knowing language rules. So if you have both, it's fine, it's good that you have both declarative and procedural knowledge. But if you lack in the declarative rules knowledge and you are good at the procedural, fine, like the native speakers are there. So declarative knowledge can facilitate the development of procedural knowledge, fine, we had a discussion on that, but it is not necessary and sufficient condition for development of such knowledge. It helps you, but it is not sufficient condition. Students need to develop mastery of mastery of target language items, not by memorizing rules, but by using the target items in communicative context. This is an important point. You see that, of course, students, they need to develop mastery of the target language items by not by memorizing but by using. So use is important, right? So procedural knowledge is important. Well, students, so this learning, of course, that take place by using the language, right? So what do we call this approach? Yes, we call it learning by doing, is called experientialism. Learning by doing, of course. Well, students, so these were the principles that we talked about. That, see, first principle, integrate, right, inductive and deductive approaches, right? We talked about that is the principle which is very important, right? Now we are moving on to, or rather, the classroom techniques, that when you are teaching the grammar, right, you are a student of your course, you are teaching language, as of course teaching English as a foreign language. So what would you do, in fact? What would be your classroom activities or tasks, right? So here, there are these researchers, Doughty and William. They distinguish between techniques in which grammar point is implicit and those in which grammar is explicit. Very simple, that implicitly you give the grammar mean that you don't give rules first. You want students to find out rules. That is called implicit grammar point. And second is explicit, that you give them rules, right? So these two researchers, in fact, they categorize these classroom techniques on the basis of implicit grammar point and explicit grammar point. You were also in 1996, of course, placed techniques on a continuum. You know, there's a line continuum moving from this page to another. So continuum from those that focus on accuracy to those that focus on fluency. So Doty and William, they made course. They, in fact, these classroom the techniques, right, on the basis of explicit grammar teaching and implicit. And you're, of course, on a continuum, right? I mean, there's a sequence starting from accuracy to fluency. Noonan, in fact, categorized these techniques into two parts: reproductive techniques and then creative techniques. Now, what are reproductive techniques, my dear students? Yes, in which students or your learners basically reproduce models provided by the teachers or the textbooks. So they are reproductive techniques. Fine, that the teachers provide them rules and the students simply reproduce them. And second one is creative techniques. Now, dear students, very simple. What is it? That students are able to create ideas. So in what happens, in which learners have the freedom to use a range of structures to express their meaning. This is called what? Creative technique. I hope you understand, right? So these are your point of view, and then Williams and Hotty's, Doty view, and finally your writer, editor Noonan. What he says, that is reproductive, when you give rules to the students and they produce. Second, creative, in which learners have the freedom to use a range of structures to express their meanings. All right. So again, there is another, of course, classroom technique is, we call it input enactment. What is it? Input enhancement, right? I say again for you, input enhancement. Now, what is it? It refers to the language that is made available to the learner. Input enhancement refer to the sound systems, refer to pronunciation available to the learner, refers to vocabulary available to the learner, refers to the grammar, right? So that is input enhancement, mean that the language that is made available to the learner. Then, of course, this technique for getting students to notice the grammar items that the teacher wants to introduce. So in input enhancement, what happens, that it's a technique for the students, right, to notice what? The grammar item, the grammar point that the teacher wants to introduce. But students have to find out, students have to notice that. Because input enhancement, teacher, in fact, maybe teacher gives them, right, of course, an exercise, and you see, he wants students, he in fact wants the input from the student. Student would see that, right, it could be a dialogue, it could be, a short summary, it could be an exercise, and this teacher, they would do what? Teacher would give the students, and the students, they would try to find out, right? So input enhancement, they would get from that, the input, students would get from the handout, and they would enhance themselves. How? With this technique, what happens? The teacher draws students' attention to items that are meant to be noticed by flagging. It's also a technique. Flagging means underlining, right? Such as, of course, mean highlighting, underlining, or coloring. So there's an approach, we call it flagging, from the word flag, right? So if you want a particular grammar item, that you being a teacher of the grammar, right? So when you teach grammar and you want your students to notice some particular grammatical point, so you flag that. So how can you flag? You may change the color of that, or you may underline it in fact, and we call it what? That input enhancement. Clear? Right, okay, another, if we move on, that yes, of course, awareness raising techniques, right? Such aware, because this is what we call them, that you see, because the teacher gives an activity and the students try to find out, they try to what? Locate, right? How do they locate? Yes, with the help of the flagging. What is flagging? The underlining, of course, of the teacher, or the bolding. For example, these days we are in this computer age, so teacher can bold a particular grammatical. For example, subject verb agreement is there, right? Well, students, so teacher can in fact, what do we call them? We call them awareness, of course, raising techniques, where the teacher wants students to notice some grammatical points, and what he does for it, he flags, he underlines or he bolds that grammatical point. For example, for the third person singular possessive determiner, there is example given over here, and you see that, right? So, the pronouns have been highlighted, right? So, this technique can be called as flagging. Okay, another technique is that we can use in the class, that is consciousness raising. I told you about it initially, but I mentioned that we will discuss it now. So this is consciousness raising in fact. What is it? Activities are designed to get learners to notice a particular grammatical feature or principle. Fine. However, learners are not required to use or practice the target item. Here, for example, what is it? You can see example, we took a gift for the teacher. We took the teacher a gift. He recited a poem for his girlfriend, right? He recited his girlfriend a poem. Now you can see that, of course, that work out the rule of the correct order of direct object and indirect object. If you see the first sentence, we took a gift for the teacher, right? We took a gift for the teacher, and then we took the teacher a gift. You see? And then see, we recited a poem he recited a poem for his girlfriend, right? And then we see he recited his girlfriend a poem. That, of course, how to use direct object and the indirect object. Let's have a look in the first sentence, my dear students. So what we said, that he took a gift for the teacher, right? Gift for, see, he took a gift, right? We took a gift for the teacher. And second, we took the gift, we took the teacher a gift. So in the first place, you see what is that? The object, the direct object. In fact, we saw that is subject, there is a verb, and then object, right? A gift for the teacher, makes sense. But second time, when you say, then you change the order of the direct object and you bring teacher first. See, we took the teacher a gift, right? In the third place, he recited a poem for his girlfriend. And the fourth time, you see, he recited his girlfriend a poem, right? So sentence, in fact, sentence 1 and sentence 3 and sentence 2 and sentence 4. So what does it mean? That what is the rule? That, of course, first we give direct object, and then you see we gave a gift. What did we give? A gift for the teacher. And then third sentence, he recited what? Right? A poem for his girlfriend. I hope you understand. So this is what we call it, consciousness raising. Is that clear? So the technique that we can use in the class, my dear student, is grammar dictation. Very simple exercise that we can do in the class. So what happens? It involves students collaborating in small groups. Fine. They actively using their language, reflecting on what? On the way grammar works in context. Like you see, this very simple. The teacher, in fact, can give what? dictation to the students. Fine, and we call it dictation and given by declause, right? It encourages students to reflect on their own output. And it's very simple. What we can do, teacher dictates a passage containing target language forms at normal speed. Students take notes and then work in small groups to recreate the original passage, in fact. So students reconstruct the original passage, whatever dictation is given by the students. Then what do you have? Another technique is, that is, we call it garden path technique that can be used in the class. I give you example. Here mean there is a dialogue, fine, and briefly if I tell you about this the dialogue, that you see rules. Here mean the teacher expects students to generalize some rules, right? And here we see that the teacher tries to make students generalize rules for superlative degree, right? And once you in fact read this the dialogue, you would be able to find out what is a garden path technique, right? It's a dialogue, you can have a look, it would help you in fact. So for other activities, my dear students, yes, you can refer to your book. You will find some activities, right? For example, one activity is talking about in the class, that grammar in the classroom. You see, you have dialogues in one activity. The teacher uses ALM to teach grammar, and the second activity, the teacher uses communicative approach to do the same, right? There are two activities, you can have a look. Also, of course, there are some other activities. Read them, and there's also commentary at the end, and this commentary will help you that, of course, what is going on in that particular activity. So, my dear students, today in this class, we talked about the grammar, right? And we saw that grammar is what? You see, initially we said that generally people feel that grammar is a set of rules, right? And we asked Longman Dictionary of Applied Linguistics. So over there we found that what is grammar is what? A set of, if I go back and show you the definition, it will help you here. Now what is it? You see, grammar is, yes, a description of the structure of a language and the way in which units such as words and phrases are combined to produce what? Sentences in the language, right? So we talked about grammar, and then we moved on to what is the background to teaching grammar, and we saw, of course, that what happened before 30 years, then what happened in 1970, and then of course the focus initially was on the form, right? And then how did we reach to CLT, communicative language teaching? And then we talked about principles of grammar teaching. Remember, we talked about inductive approach, we talked about deductive approach, in fact. You see, very important. And then of course that we need to integrate this, right? And then while teaching grammar, what we need to do, that we need to make relation between that grammatical point and what? The communication as well, because language is communication, language is a vehicle of communication. And then we talk about some activities, techniques in the class, right? We talked about garden path, we talked about other input enhancement, right? So these are techniques that we discussed, you can use, of course, for teaching grammar. And then in the class, yes, how you can use the grammar. So dear students, yes, grammar teaching, people feel it is a challenge as well, right? And why it is challenge? Because one way is that the people, they teach it for only one purpose, that is grammar, that they see there are rules, right? And generally, of course, you see that people, maybe it's nature of human being that we try to jump the rules, we try to violate the rules. So it's difficult once you see, you just say that they are the rules only. But once you link it with communication, so you would feel that you would enjoy teaching grammar, and the learner would also be happy once they would learn these rules, So with this, it's time to say Allah Hafiz. See you in the next class, where we will review all our lectures. So today we finished talking of what? This 3 parts of what? Exploring language. We could not start the next one, that was discourse. So with this, thank you very much.